By the fire's glow, the truth is always revealed. Welcome to the Fireside Casebook.
Chapter 1. The salmon and the Sassenach. The rain in Lochdubh was not so much a downpour, as it was a persistent, clinging mist that turned the heather a bruised purple and the back of one's neck into a cold, damp sponge. PC Hamish Macbeth, a tall, lanky man with a shock of unruly red hair and eyes the colour of a Highland loch after a storm, stood knee-deep in the black waters of the Lochdubh. He was not, strictly speaking, on duty. He was also, strictly speaking, not supposed to be standing there with a poaching wire in his hand. But the larder at the police station was empty. The price of chops at the local butcher had reached a level Hamish considered pure thievery, and a fresh salmon was nature's way of providing for the underpaid. "Steady now, Lugs," Hamish whispered to the ugly, tuft-eared dog sitting stoically on the bank. Lugs gave a low whine, his amber eyes fixed on the silver flash beneath the water's surface. Hamish's long, sensitive fingers felt the vibration of the wire. With a sudden, fluid grace that contradicted his usual slouching gait, he hauled. A magnificent silver salmon thrashed briefly before being dispatched with a swift, professional thump. "That's dinner, breakfast, and maybe a bit of peace," Hamish murmured, tucking the fish into a canvas bag. His peace, however, was as fleeting as a Highland summer. The silence of the glen was shattered by the aggressive roar of a high-performance engine. A bright, metallic gold Range Rover vehicle entirely too clean for the Sutherland mud came careening down the single-track road, its tyres spraying peat-coloured water over the dry stone walls. It screeched to a halt near the bridge, its horn blaring a rhythmic, arrogant tune. Hamish sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of a man who just wanted to be left alone. He scrambled up the bank, adjusting his cap so it sat slightly crooked, lending him an air of rural gormlessness that had served him well for years. Out of the Golden Beast stepped a woman who looked as though she had been teleported directly from a Chelsea boutique. She was clad in a crisp, white linen suit-suicidal attire, for the Highlands, and sported a pair of oversized sunglasses that reflected the misty mountains back at them. "You there, Constable!" she shouted, her voice a sharp English soprano that could have clipped a hedge. Hamish sauntered over, his hands deep in his pockets. "I? Can I be helping you, ma'am?" "I am Penelope Sterling," she announced, as if expecting the mountains to bow. "I have bought the Brae. I was told the local police would be keeping an eye on the property. It's been 3 days, and I haven't seen a single patrol." Hamish blinked slowly. The Brae was a crumbling Victorian villa on the edge of the village that had been vacant, since old Mrs. Greaves had passed away in the middle of a particularly spirited game of bridge. "Ah, the big house," Hamish said, his voice thickening into a slow Highland lilt. "It's a long way up the hill, remember. And the police van, you see, she's a temperamental beast. The spark plugs have a grudge against the incline." Penelope Sterling took a step closer, her nose wrinkling. "What is that smell? Is that fish?" "Peat, remember," Hamish lied effortlessly, shifting the canvas bag behind his leg. "The smell of the land. It gets into everything. Into the skin, the clothes, even the soul, some say." "Disgusting," she snapped. "Listen to me, Constable Macbeth. I assume that's you, the one they say is local colour. I am launching Sterling's High Tea tomorrow. It's an exclusive high-end experience for discerning travellers. I have guests coming from London. Important guests. I expect this village to be quiet, orderly, and for God's sake, try to do something about the smell of manure near the post office." Hamish tilted his head. "High tea, is it? We usually just call it the tea here, or a fly cup if there's a biscuit involved." "This is not a fly cup," she sneered. "This is an event. I have hired a chef from Edinburgh. There will be Earl Grey infused salmon mousse and gold leaf scones. It's about time someone brought a bit of civilization to this damp little corner of the world." She climbed back into her car, the gold paint shimmering mockingly against the grey sky. "And do put a tie on, Constable. You look like a poacher." With a spray of gravel, she was gone. Hamish watched the Range Rover disappear toward the village. Lugs trotted over and nudged Hamish's hand. "Gold leaf scones, Lugs," Hamish sighed. "And she wants me to wear a tie." He looked down at the canvas bag. The salmon was fresh, the air was cool, and for a moment he considered just going home to his stove. But he knew Lochdubh. A woman like Penelope Sterling with her gold car and her arrogance was like a bright lure dropped into a dark pool. Something was bound to bite, and usually in Hamish experience it ended with a body. Chapter 2. The crumpet and the corpse the following morning dawned with a sky the colour of a dirty fleece, and the Highland mist had upgraded itself to a persistent, bone-chilling drizzle. Inside the police station, Hamish Macbeth was blissfully ignoring the weather. Ah, the scent of poaching-grade salmon frying in a pan of butter filled the small kitchen, competing with the rich, dark aroma of coffee. "Just a sliver for you, Lugs," Hamish murmured, flaking off a piece of the pink fish and dropping it into the dog's bowl. Lugs inhaled it with a grateful wag. Hamish sat down, a crust of bread in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other, feeling that, for once, the world was in balance. Naturally, that was when the telephone began to scream. Hamish stared at the black plastic device with profound distaste. He considered letting it ring. He considered the possibility that it might be DCI Blair calling from Strathbane to bark about paperwork. He even considered that it might be a wrong number. But the ringing had a frantic, rhythmic quality to it, the sound of village panic. He picked it up on the 10th ring. Lochdubh Police Station. "PC Macbeth speaking," he said, his voice slow and thick with a simulated sleepiness. "Hamish! Hamish, you must come at once." It was Mrs. Kennedy, the postmistress, her voice vibrating with the kind of excitement that usually only accompanied a scandalous divorce or a half-price sale on wool. "It's the Englishwoman at the Brae. It's just terrible, Hamish. She's quite purple." Hamish sighed, looking regretfully at his half-eaten salmon. "Purple, Mrs. Kennedy? Is she wearing a new tracksuit then?" "She's dead, Hamish. Dead as a doornail, and right in the middle of her fancy tea party. The London folk are running about like headless chickens. It's a disgrace to the village." Hamish stood up, his joints popping. "I'll be there. Tell them not to touch anything, especially the scones." He hung up, grabbed his heavy waterproof cape, and whistled for Lugs. Oh! The walk up to the Brae was a steep, winding track that turned to slick mud in the rain. By the time Hamish reached the gates, his boots were caked in peat and his red hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked less like a representative of the law and more like a soggy shepherd who had lost his flock. The scene at the Brae was one of organised chaos. The golden Range Rover was parked crookedly on the lawn, and several people in expensive, damp silk outfits were huddled under the Victorian portico, looking as though they had stumbled into a nightmare. Inside, the grand dining room had been transformed into a shrine to pretension. Lace doilies covered every surface, and a three-tiered silver stand groaned under the weight of finger sandwiches and pastries. At the head of the table sat Penelope Sterling. She was no longer demanding ties or complaining about manure. She was slumped forward, her face resting squarely in a large, ornate bowl of Devonshire clotted cream. Her signature oversized sunglasses had fallen off and were sitting in a dish of strawberry jam. One hand was clawed into the tablecloth, and the other was still clutching a silver tea strainer. Hamish muttered, stepping into the room. "That's a messy way to go." A tall, thin man with a monocle which seemed anachronistic even for a Sassenach approached Hamish, his face pale. "I say, Constable, this is ghastly. We were just about to start the first course." Penelope stood up to make a toast to civilizing the wilderness, took a bite of a scone, and then simply collapsed. She made a dreadful gurgling sound. Hamish didn't look at the man. His eyes were roaming the room. He saw the important guest's fashion editor with a look of profound boredom, a minor lord who seemed more concerned about the lack of gin, and a nervous-looking chef in white linens who was wringing his hands in the corner. Hamish leaned over the body, his nose twitching. There was the smell of cream, yes, but beneath it, something sharper, something bitter. He noticed a single discarded scone on Penelope's plate. It was topped with a shimmering, paper-thin layer of gold leaf. "Gold leaf scones," Hamish whispered to himself. "It was the local honey," the chef wailed, stepping forward. "She insisted on using the local honey from that man in the glen. I told her we should use the imported acacia." "Hush now," Hamish said softly, his Highland drawl becoming more pronounced. He looked like a man who was struggling to count his own fingers, but his mind was clicking through the details. The way the chair was pushed back, the way the tea in Penelope's cup was barely touched, the way the other guests were looking at each other with more suspicion than grief. "This is a tragedy, so it is," Hamish said aloud, his voice full of mock sympathy. "A terrible interruption to a lovely tea. I'll have to call the big men from Strathbane. They'll be wanting to ask you all some very long, very loud questions." He looked at Penelope's purple face. She had wanted to bring civilization to Lochdubh, but she had forgotten one thing. In the Highlands, the locals had been refining the art of the quiet grudge for centuries. Hamish pulled a small notebook from his pocket, which was mostly filled with reminders to buy milk and dog food. He began to scribble, his face a mask of rural confusion. "Now," he said, looking at the assembled Londoners, "who was it that poured the tea?" "Oh!" Chapter 3. The big men from Strathbane. The peace of the Highland afternoon was officially murdered 3 hours later. It wasn't the wind or the rain that did it, but the wailing, banshee shriek of police sirens echoing off the crags of Ben Breek. 2 white and blue patrol cars and a nondescript black sedan hurtled up the driveway of the Brae, scattering gravel like buckshot, and nearly sending a terrified Lugs diving into a rhododendron bush. Out of the black sedan stepped Detective Chief Inspector Cyril Blair. He was a man who looked as though he had been carved out of a particularly irritable block of suet. His suit was too tight, his face was a permanent shade of post-coronary crimson, and he hated the Highlands with a passion usually reserved for tax collectors and cold sores. "Macbeth!" Blair roared, his voice bouncing off the Victorian stone. "What the devil are you doing standing around like a decorative garden gnome?" "Why isn't this scene secured?" Hamish, who was leaning casually against a stone pillar while gnawing on a piece of dry toast had found in his pocket, straightened up slowly. He adjusted his cap to a particularly jaunty, idiotic angle. "Ah, Detective Chief Inspector," Hamish said, his Highland lilt thick enough to spread on a scone. "You're making good time, so you are. The roads are quite soggy after the rain. I was worried you might end up in the loch. Don't you go solely me, you ginger streak of nothing," Blair snapped, shoving past Hamish and nearly tripping over Lugs. "Move that mongrel before I have him impounded. Now, where's the body? And why haven't you arrested anyone? I suppose you were too busy poaching salmon to notice a murder in your own backyard." "Lady is in the dining room, sir," Hamish said, ignoring the jibe with a practiced, blank stare. "Right in the clotted cream. It's a very rich way to go, I'm thinking." Blair marched into the dining room, followed by his 2 sycophants, Detectives Anderson and McLean. They swarmed the room, their heavy boots trampling over the delicate atmosphere Hamish had been trying to preserve. Blair took one look at Penelope Sterling's purple face and let out a grunt of satisfaction. "Open and shut," Blair declared, not even bothering to wait for the forensics team to finish their preliminary photos. "Look at the colour of her. Cyanide, or something equally nasty. And look at this room. A bunch of wealthy Londoners and one frantic-looking cook. Who's the chef?" The young man in the white linens, whose name tag read Sven, stepped forward, trembling so violently his tall hat threatened to migrate to the floor. I am, sir, but I didn't save it, Sunshine," Blair barked. "You're the help. You've got a grudge against the upper classes, don't you? Wanted to spice up the high tea with a bit of rat poison. It's a classic motive. Jealousy. Class warfare. But I only used the local honey," Sven wailed. "She made me buy it from the man in the glen, Angus Muffy." Blair's eyes lit up. "Angus MC. The old poacher? He's probably been distilling moonshine and pesticides in the same vat. There's your accomplice. A local ruffian and a disgruntled cook. Anderson, get the cuffs ready. We'll have this wrapped up before the pubs open in Strathbane." Hamish cleared his throat, a small, polite sound that Blair pointedly ignored. "Sir, if I might just be saying, Penelope Sterling was a woman who liked to be in control. Oh, she chose the menu, she chose the guests, and she chose the honey. It seems a bit strange that a man like Angus, who can barely find his own boots in the morning, would manage to poison a specific scone." Blair turned on Hamish, his eyes bulging. "Did I ask for your input, Macbeth? You're a village bobby. Your job is to tell people where the public toilets are and occasionally rescue a sheep from a ditch. Leave the detective work to the men who actually wear ties that match their shirts." "Of course, sir," Hamish said humbly, looking down at his own frayed tie, which was currently stained with a small smudge of strawberry jam. "I'm sure you're right. It's just the dog, you see." "The dog?" Blair screamed. "What does the dog have to do with anything?" "Lugs here," Hamish said, gesturing to the dog who was currently sniffing a guest's expensive Italian leather loafers. He didn't bark when the tea was served. He usually barks at strangers, but he sat quite still. It's as if everyone in the room belonged there. Blair let out a sound like a kettle boiling over. "Get out, Macbeth. Take your mangy hound and go patrol a peat bog. Stay out of my sight until I've hauled these 2 off to the cells. I don't want your rural intuition contaminating my crime scene." Hamish nodded obediently, his face a mask of disappointment. "Aye, sir. I'll just be wandering along then. Maybe I'll go see if the postmistress has any of those nice ginger snaps." As he walked out of the house, Hamish's slouch vanished. His eyes, no longer blank and dull, darted back toward the dining room window. He had seen the way the important guests had looked at Blair with a mixture of relief and hidden contempt. They were happy to see a loud-mouthed fool chasing a chef and a local hermit. It kept the spotlight off them. "Well, Lugs," Hamish whispered as they reached the end of the drive, "the big men are busy arresting the wrong people. I suppose that leaves us to do the mooching. He looked back at the gloomy Victorian villa. The shadows were lengthening, and the mist was rolling in from the loch like a shroud. Somewhere in that room, someone had watched Penelope Sterling die, and they were currently laughing at DCI Blair's incompetence. Hamish pulled his collar up against the rain. He needed a cup of tea, a warm fire, and a very long chat with someone who knew exactly who Penelope Sterling had been before she decided to civilize Lochdubh. Chapter 4. Tea, sympathy, and a side of slander. The rain had transitioned from a dismal drizzle to a spiteful, horizontal sleet by the time Hamish Macbeth reached the village proper. He steered his lanky frame toward the Lochdubh post office and general store, lugs trotting at his heels like a sodden, hairy shadow. The bell above the door gave a cheerful, tinny ring that stood in stark contrast to the grim business unfolding up at the Brae. Mrs. Kennedy was already behind the counter, her eyes bright with the predatory gleam of a woman who possessed the morning's most valuable currency: information. "A terrible business, Hamish," she said, leaning over a stack of the People's Friend magazines. "Simply ghastly. They say her face turned the colour of a pickled cabbage. Is it true she died in the Devonshire cream? Such a waste of a good dairy product." Hamish leaned against the counter, his shoulders slumped in a posture of profound defeat. "It's a black day for the village, Mrs. Kennedy, and DCI Blair is up there now, shouting at the very walls. He's convinced poor Sven the chef put weed killer in the scones." "Sven? That boy hasn't the stomach to kill a spider," Mrs. Kennedy scoffed, reaching into a glass jar and producing a digestive biscuit, which she slid across the counter toward Hamish. "And Angus MC.Fee's honey is the finest in the county. My own cousin uses it for her cough." Hamish took the biscuit with a grateful nod, dunking it into a cup of lukewarm tea Mrs. Kennedy had seemingly conjured from thin air. "Aye, but Blair wants a quicker rest so he can get back to the city. He doesn't care about the why of it. He just wants a who he can put in a cage." He chewed slowly, his eyes wandering to the window. "Tell me, Mrs. Kennedy, what was the talk about Penelope Sterling? Aside from the gold car and the fancy clothes. A woman like that doesn't just move to the Highlands for the scenery." Mrs. Kennedy lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She was a property consultant, or so she told the ladies at the guild. But Mr. Henderson at the bank, who, mind you, shouldn't be talking, hinted that she was more of a hatchet woman. She bought up distressed assets. And she didn't just want to live at the Brae, Hamish. She wanted to buy the waterfront, all of it. To build those ecopods for the London set. Hamish felt a cold prickle that had nothing to do with the sleet. The waterfront was the heart of the village. The locals would not like that. Like it? They were ready to march with pitchforks. But Penelope had a way of finding things out. She's been seen touring the village, asking very pointed questions about who owned what and who owed whom. She had a little black leather notebook she was always tapping against her chin. "A notebook, you say?" Hamish mused. He hadn't seen a notebook in the dining room. Leaving the post office, Hamish made his way to the Tommel Castle Hotel. It was the only place grand enough to house the important guests who hadn't been detained in the police vans. He found them in the residence lounge, huddled around a fireplace that was putting out more smoke than heat. There was Lord Ponsonby, clutching a glass of scotch as if it were a life-preserver, Cynthia, the fashion editor, who was aggressively filing her nails, and a sharp-featured man in a charcoal suit named Arthur, who Hamish pegged as a lawyer before the man even opened his mouth. "Disgraceful," Lord Ponsonby muttered as Hamish approached. "That fat policeman with the red face treated us like common pickpockets. I shall be writing to the Home Office. I'm sure he's just..." "Thorough," Hamish said, pulling up a chair and looking as though he might fall asleep in it. "A terrible shock for you all. Friends of Mrs. Sterling, were you?" "Friends?" Cynthia let out a jagged laugh. "Penelope didn't have friends, Constable. She had investors. We all put money into her Highland boutique retreat scheme. And then, yesterday morning, she informed us that the costs had doubled, and if we didn't double our investment, our initial capital would be absorbed by her holding company." "Absorbed," Hamish repeated. "That's a very polite word for stolen, I'm thinking." "She was a shark," Arthur the lawyer said, his voice cold. "A very talented, very hungry shark. She had enough dirt on Ponsonby's family estate to keep the tabloids fed for a decade, and she knew exactly which of my clients were looking to hide their assets from the Inland Revenue. So," Hamish said, scratching lugs behind the ears, "you all had tea with a woman who was threatening to ruin you, and then she died. That's a very convenient bit of timing, so it is." Lord Ponsonby's glass rattled against his teeth. "Are you accusing us, Constable?" Hamish looked up, his eyes wide and innocent. "Me? Oh no, sir. I'm just a village bobby. I was just wondering, did any of you happen to see where she put that little black notebook of hers? The one she used for her consulting? The silence that followed was heavy and brittle. Cynthia stopped filing her nails. Arthur adjusted his glasses. Ponsonby stared into his scotch. "No," Arthur said finally. "I didn't see it. Perhaps it's in her car." Hamish stood up, his joints giving their customary pop. "Aye, perhaps. Well, I'll leave you to your drinks. It's a sad thing to die in the cream, especially when nobody seems to be missing you much." As he walked out, Hamish felt the weight of the missing notebook pressing on his mind. Penelope Sterling hadn't just been bringing civilization to Lochdubh, she had been bringing blackmail. And in a village where secrets were kept as tightly as a miser's purse, that was a far more dangerous commodity than gold leaf scones. Chapter 5. The glass house of gossip, the Tommel Castle Hotel, sat atop a rugged rise like a stone beast guarding the entrance to the glen. It was a place of high ceilings, draughty corridors, and a sense of fading Victorian grandeur that suited its owner, Colonel Halberton Smythe, perfectly. It was also the home of Priscilla, the Colonel's daughter, a woman whose beauty and cool, blue-eyed intelligence had been the bane and the blessing of Hamish Macbeth's life, for more years than he cared to admit. Hamish stood in the conservatory, a glass-walled room that felt more like a giant refrigerator in the Highland winter. Oh! He was pretending to examine a dying fern while Luggs occupied himself by sniffing the hem of a heavy velvet curtain. "You look particularly miserable today, Hamish," a voice said, a voice like silk and fine crystal. Hamish turned. Priscilla Halberton Smythe stood in the doorway, wearing a cashmere sweater the colour of a summer sky and a pair of perfectly tailored trousers. She looked, as always, as though she belonged in a glossy magazine, far removed from the mud and the murder of Lochdubh. "Och, it's just the rain, Priscilla," Hamish said, his voice dropping into its most humble, rustic register. "And the DCI from Strathbane is currently turning the village upside down. He's got it into his head that the poor chef is a master assassin." Priscilla walked toward him, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. She was one of the few people who knew that beneath Hamish's simple bobby exterior lay a mind as sharp as a stalking knife. Blair is a fool, and we both know it. But Penelope Sterling was not a fool. She was a very dangerous woman, Hamish. She came to dinner here 3 nights ago, and I watched her. She wasn't looking at the menu, she was looking at the people around the table, as if she were appraising furniture at an auction. Hamish leaned against a wrought-iron table. The guests at the tea, they all seemed to hate her. Lord Ponsonby, that fashion lady, and the lawyer. "Of course they hated her," Priscilla said, tucking a stray lock of blonde hair behind her ear. "But you're looking at it through the lens of Lochdubh, Hamish. You see a woman being rude and greedy. You're missing the social architecture of the Sassenach." Hamish blinked, looking intentionally confused. "The architecture? Is that not for buildings, then?" Priscilla sighed, a sound of affectionate exasperation. "Don't play stupid Hamish with me. You know exactly what I mean. Ponsonby isn't just a lord, he's a lord with a crumbling estate in Sussex and a son with a gambling debt that would make a bookie weep. He couldn't afford to double any investment. If Penelope called in his markers, he would be out on the street. And the others? "Cynthia, the editor, is a fraud," Priscilla continued, her voice lowering. "Her magazine is folding, and she's been using company funds to maintain her lifestyle." Penelope knew. And Arthur, the lawyer? He specializes in offshore accounts. Penelope was his finder. She brought him the clients, and she knew exactly where the bodies, financially speaking, were buried. Hamish scratched his chin. So they all had a reason to want her gone. But how do I do it? In front of everyone? It's a bold thing, to put poison in a scone while 3 people are watching you. "That's the thing, Hamish," Priscilla said, stepping closer. He could smell her perfume as something subtle and expensive that made him want to forget all about dead property consultants and gold leaf scones. They weren't just watching her, they were watching each other. Penelope made a point of making everyone feel vulnerable. She told me, quite smugly over her gin and tonic, that she had a fail-safe in her notebook. She said if anything happened to her, the notebook would be delivered to the authorities by a trusted third party. Hamish's eyes sharpened. A trusted third party? In Lochdubh? She didn't have any friends here. No, Priscilla agreed. But she had an employee. Not the chef, Hamish. A girl she brought from London. A quiet little thing named Mary. She wasn't at the high tea. Penelope told her to stay at the hotel to finalize some paperwork. Hamish felt a sudden cold jolt of adrenaline. Where is this Mary now? "I haven't seen her since this morning," Priscilla said, her brow furrowing. "The colonel said she checked out early, shortly after the sirens started. She took a taxi to the station at Laireg." Hamish straightened his back, his lazy slouch disappearing instantly. "Thank you, Priscilla. You have a better eye for the sharks than I have." Priscilla reached out and touched his arm, a brief, fleeting pressure. "Be careful, Hamish. If that girl has the notebook, she's either the next victim or the most dangerous person in the county? Hamish nodded, his mind already racing. He looked at Lugs, who had finished with the curtain and was looking toward the door. I have to go, Priscilla. If I'm not careful, Blair will arrest the taxi driver for being an accessory to a scone. Hamish, she called out as he reached the door. He turned. When this is over, the Colonel has a very fine bottle of Malmsey. You could come up for a glass, if you can manage to stay awake. Hamish gave her a small, crooked smile, the one that always made her wonder if she had ever truly pinned him down. I'll try, remember, but you know me. The Highland air, it makes a man very sleepy. He vanished into the mist, leaving Priscilla alone in the cold glass house. The hunt was on, and for once, the lazy PC Macbeth was moving very, very fast. Chapter 6. The bitter taste of victory. The wind was howling down the chimney of the Lochdubh police station with the sound of a tormented soul. But inside, the atmosphere was even more turbulent. Oh. Blair was pacing the small linoleum floor, his face a triumphant shade of magenta that suggested he was dangerously close to a celebratory stroke. On the wooden bench, looking small and bewildered, sat Angus MC Fee. The old crofter was dressed in a tweed jacket that smelled strongly of wet wool, tobacco, and the general musk of a man who viewed soap as a modern, unnecessary luxury. Next to him, Sven the chef was weeping softly into a damp tea towel. It's a masterpiece of detection, Macbeth, Blair barked, slamming a glass jar down on the desk. Inside was a murky amber liquid. We found this hidden in the back of MC Fee's shed, arsenic-based sheep dip. And what do we find in the victim's stomach? Arsenic. The chef here admits he used MC Fee's honey. It's a conspiracy. The local savage provides the toxin, and the disgruntled employee serves it up. Hamish, who was standing by the stove stirring a pot of grey-looking beef stew, looked up with a vacant, wide-eyed expression. Oh, that's a terrible thing, so it is. A conspiracy in Lochdubh. We haven't had one of those since the post office ran out of pension forms. Don't be thick, man, Blair sneered. It's motivated by greed. I have already established that MC Fee was being evicted from his grazing rights by the Sterling woman's new development. He had the motive, and the chef had the access. Hamish wandered over to the desk, his hands deep in his pockets. He peered at the jar of sheep dip. It's a very old jar, DC var. My grandfather had one just like it. But tell me, did you find any of the arsenic in the honey jars remaining at the Brae? Blair stiffened. Forensics is busy. But the link is obvious. Why else would he have sheep dip when he hasn't kept sheep in 5 years? Oh. He keeps bees now, sir, Hamish said gently. And bees are very sensitive creatures. If there was arsenic in the honey, the bees would be dropping like flies before they ever finished the comb. And Angus there, well, he's a man of habit. Hamish turned to Angus. Angus, man, tell the DCI about the honey you gave to the English lady. Angus wiped his nose with his sleeve. I told the fat one already. I didn't give her the honey. She came and took it. Said she was requisitioning it as part of the local heritage. Didn't pay a penny. She didn't. Just marched into the honey shed and grabbed 3 jars of the late summer heather. See, Blair shouted. He was angry about the theft. Aye, Hamish mused, scratching his red hair. But there's a funny thing. I was up at the house earlier, helping the forensics lads move a heavy dresser purely to be useful. You understand, and I saw the jars in the larder. 2 were open. One was used for the scones, and the other was used for the Lord's toast. Lord Ponsonby had a great deal of it. He's currently at the hotel complaining about the lack of central heating, but he's remarkably undead for a man who's eaten arsenic. Blair's mouth opened and closed like a landed trout. He might have a stronger constitution. And then there's the matter of the gold leaf, Hamish continued, his voice dropping into a slow, rhythmic lilt that usually meant he was about to pull the rug out from under someone. Penelope Sterling was a very particular woman. She wanted that gold leaf to shine. Now, the chef says he put the honey on the scones, and then Penelope herself insisted on applying the gold leaf with her own little tweezers, just before the guests arrived. She wanted the credit for the artistry, you see. Hamish pulled a small, clear plastic bag from his pocket. Inside was a tiny, shimmering flake of gold. I found this on the floor of the dining room. Not near the table, mind you. Over by the sideboard where the guests' handbags and coats were kept. Now, why would a piece of gold leaf from a scone be over by the handbags? Blair scowled. What are you rambling about, Macbeth? I'm thinking, Hamish said, looking remarkably like a man who wasn't thinking at all, that the arsenic wasn't in the honey, and it wasn't in the scone, it was in the glue. Or rather, whatever was used to make the gold leaf stick when the honey proved too runny. If you look at the victim's fingers, DC Far's Blair, you'll find they're stained quite yellow. Not from the cream, but from a very concentrated dose of poison she picked up while she was finishing those scones. He leaned in closer to Blair, his eyes twinkling with a dry, hidden mirth. And if Angus here had done it, he would have just hit her over the head with a spade. It's much less complicated for a man of his age. Blair looked at the weeping chef, then at the grimy crofter, and finally at the jar of sheep dip. The masterpiece of detection was crumbling. I'm still holding them for questioning, Blair barked, though the conviction had vanished from his voice. Anderson! McLean, get these two into the back of the car. We're going back to Strathbane to check the toxicology on the gold leaf. As Blair stormed out, Hamish sighed and went back to his stew. He knew the gold leaf was a dead end for the murderer, but a perfect way to get Blair out of his hair for a few hours. The arsenic hadn't been an accident of artistry. It had been a calculated delivery. Well, lugs, Hamish whispered as the sirens faded into the distance. Blair is chasing gold flakes. I think it's time we found out what happened to that girl Mary and her black notebook. Because if the poison was on the scones, someone had to be very close to the civilizing Penelope Sterling to see her apply it. He took a sip of his stew. It was cold, thin, and tasted vaguely of disappointment, much like the lives of the people currently staying at the House Hotel. Chapter 7. The Girl in the Rain. The Highland weather had progressed from unpleasant to positively biblical. The wind shrieked through the mountain passes, and the Lochdubh had risen until it was a churning, peat-stained torrent that threatened to swallow the lower road. DCI Blair was safely tucked away in the back of a police car halfway to Strathbane, clutching his jar of sheep dip and dreaming of a promotion. Hamish Macbeth, however, was not at home by his stove. He was standing by the stone bus shelter on the edge of the village, looking like a very damp, very orange scarecrow. Luggs sat at his feet, his ears flat against his head, looking up at Hamish with an expression of profound betrayal. "I know, Luggs," Hamish murmured, pulling his heavy cape tighter. "But the train from Laireg was cancelled due to a landslide on the tracks, and the bus only runs once a day. If she's leaving, she's here." A small, shivering figure was huddled in the deepest corner of the shelter, surrounded by 3 expensive-looking leather suitcases that were rapidly losing their luster in the damp air. It was Mary, the quiet little thing Priscilla had mentioned. Up close she looked barely 20, with eyes that were red-rimmed and a mouth that trembled with more than just the cold. "Oh." "Wait for the Inverness connection, so it is," Hamish said, his voice soft and non-threatening. The girl jumped, her hand flying to the breast of her coat, where a rectangular bulge suggested the presence of a certain black notebook. I didn't hear you come up. You're the policeman from the village." "PC Macbeth," Hamish said, offering a slow, comforting smile. "And this is Luggs. He's harmless mostly. He just has a powerful appreciation for anyone carrying a ham sandwich." Mary didn't smile back. "I have to get away. This place, it's horrible. That woman, she was horrible." Hamish leaned against the damp stone of the shelter. Penelope Sterling was a hard woman by all accounts. A shark, they're saying at the hotel. She liked to bite. She didn't just bite, Mary whispered, her voice cracking. She tore people apart. She liked the sound they made when they broke. She didn't want the money, not really. She had plenty of that. She wanted the power. She wanted to see Lord Ponsonby beg. She wanted to see Arthur crawl. Hamish pulled a thermos from his bag and poured a cup of tea, the steam rising in the freezing air. He handed it to her. "And what did she want from you, Mary?" "A girl like you, far from home." Mary took a gulp of the tea, her hand shaking so much the cup rattled against her teeth. "She knew about my brother. He did something foolish in London, a hit-and run. No one was hurt badly, but he panicked and fled. Penelope found out. She told me if I didn't work for her, I didn't help her gather intelligence on her investor's shed go to the yard." Hamish nodded slowly. Blackmail was like a rot. It started small and eventually brought the whole house down. "So you were her spy, the invisible girl in the corner." "I hated her," Mary said, her eyes suddenly flashing with a dark, cold fire. "I watched her eat those scones and I wished for her to choke, but I didn't kill her. I swear on my mother's soul I didn't." "I believe you," Hamish said, and he meant it. Mary had the look of a victim, not a predator. "But you have the notebook, don't you? The one she used as a fail-safe?" Mary reached into her coat and pulled it out. It was a small leather-bound volume, well-worn at the edges. "She told me if anything happened to her, I was to take this to the press. She wanted to ruin them all from the grave. She was that petty, Constable. She'd burn the whole world down just to win a grudge." Hamish took the notebook. He didn't open it, not yet. He knew what would be inside. The petty human shames that drove people to madness. But something Mary had said was bothering him. I watched her eat those scones. Mary, Hamish said, his voice dropping an octave. Who brought the gold leaf to the table? The chef said Penelope applied it herself, but she was in the dining room with the guests. She did, Mary said. She had a little kit, a velvet box with the gold and the tweezers. She kept it in the sideboard, but before she started, she asked for a bowl of warm water and a cloth to wash her hands. She was very hygienic, she said. She didn't want the Highland filth on her fingers. And who brought the water, Mary? Not me, Mary said. I was in the hallway packing her files. It was one of the guests, Lord Ponsonby, I think. He wanted to play the waiter to show how much he had humbled himself to her. Hamish felt the final piece of the puzzle slide into place with a sickening click. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't about the honey. It was about the Highland filth. Mary, Hamish said, standing up and whistling for lugs. I want you to come with me. Not to the station, but to Miss Gillespie's. You'll have a warm bed and a lock on the door. And I'll be taking this notebook for safekeeping. As they walked back through the lashing rain, Hamish looked up toward the Brae. The murder hadn't been an act of professional assassination or a sudden outburst of rage. It had been a slow, methodical trap, laid by someone who knew exactly how much Penelope Sterling despised the very ground she stood on. The motive wasn't the distressed assets or the ecopods. It was the oldest motive in the world, the desire to stop the person who is holding your leash. Chapter 8. The bait in the heather the storm had finally broken, leaving behind a sky the colour of a bruised plum, and a silence so heavy it felt as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. In the kitchen of the police station, Hamish Macbeth was engaged in what appeared to be his favourite occupation, doing absolutely nothing. He sat by the peat fire, a cracked mug of coffee in his hand, watching a single blue flame dance over the sodden turf. Lugs lay across his boots, twitching in his sleep as he chased imaginary rabbits through the gorse. To anyone peering through the window, Hamish looked like a man whose greatest ambition was to reach the end of the day without standing up. But Hamish's mind was moving with the predatory precision of a pine marten. The black notebook sat on the wooden table, its leather cover gleaming in the firelight. He had spent the last hour leafing through it. It wasn't just a diary, it was a map of human misery. Every entry was a weapon dates, bank account numbers, and sordid little details that Penelope Sterling had hoarded like a dragon's gold. Ah, the problem with a weapon, lugs, Hamish whispered, is that eventually someone tries to take it away from you. He stood up, his joints giving their familiar protest, and reached for the telephone. He didn't call the station at Strathbane. Instead, he called the Lochdubh post office. Mrs. Kennedy? It's Hamish. Aye, a terrible day indeed. Listen, I'm in a bit of a muddle. I found a wee black book up at the Brae full of London nonsense and numbers. I'm thinking it might be important, so I'm taking it over to the old schoolhouse tonight at 8. The minister has a fine eye for the ledger work, and I'm just a simple policeman who can barely add his own toes. He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. Oh, and if you happen to see any of those London folk from the hotel, don't be mentioning it. I wouldn't want to bother them with my wee problems while they're grieving. He hung up, knowing that within 20 minutes, the news would be through the village like a Highland wildfire. Mrs. Kennedy's discretion was as reliable as a sieve in a waterfall. Next, Hamish made his way to the Tommel Castle Hotel. He entered the residence lounge looking particularly dishevelled. His uniform was rumpled, his hair was a ginger thicket, and he was carrying a large, bulky envelope tucked under his arm, as if it were a precious, fragile egg. Lord Ponsonby, Arthur the lawyer, and Cynthia were still there, huddled around a table like survivors of a shipwreck. They looked up as Hamish shambled in, their expressions a mixture of irritation and sharp, calculating interest. "Still here, Constable?" Arthur asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "I thought your chief had solved the case with his jar of sheep dip. IOC DCI Blair is a very thorough man," Hamish said, leaning against the door frame and looking as though he might slide down it at any moment. "He's off in Strathbane doing the science, but I'm just a bit worried, you see. I found this book. Mary the girl, she dropped it. It's full of names. Your names, actually." The room went so still Hamish could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Our names?" Lord Ponsonby said, his face pale. "In what context?" "I'm not entirely sure," Hamish lied, tapping the envelope. "It's all in a sort of code. Distressed assets, it says, and something about a Sussex debt. I'm taking it to the old schoolhouse tonight to meet a man who knows about these things. A specialist from the city, you might say." "A specialist?" Cynthia snapped. "At the old schoolhouse? That's nearly 2 miles out of the village." "Aye," Hamish said, blinking innocently. "It's quiet there. No distractions. And since the bridge is out, I'll have to walk the high path over the crags. It'll take me a while, what with my bad knee and the dark." He let out a long, weary sigh. "Well, I'll be off. I have to go feed the dog before I set out. It's a terrible thing, the law. So much walking." As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of them in the mirror above the mantelpiece. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at each other with a sharp, predatory glance that bypassed the civility of the English upper class and went straight to the bone. Hamish walked out of the hotel and back into the cold Highland air. He didn't go to the schoolhouse. Instead, he went to his police van and pulled out a heavy canvas-wrapped bundle from the back. "They think I'm a fool, Lugs," Hamish said, patting the dog's head. "They think a Highlander is just a man in a kilt who doesn't know how to use a telephone. They think they can just wait for me on a dark path and take what they want." He looked up at the moon, which was just beginning to silver the edges of the clouds. The trap was set. The beta fake envelope filled with old grocery receipts and a few pages of a Gaelic dictionary was tucked under his arm. Now, all he had to do was wait for the shark to bite. And in Hamish's experience, a shark in a tailored suit was just as dangerous and just as predictable as the ones in the water. 9. The shadow on the crag, the high path above Lochdubh, was a treacherous ribbon of sheep track and slick schist that clung to the side of the cliff like a desperate mountaineer. On a clear day, the view was majestic on a night like this, with the moon ducking behind ragged clouds and the wind whistling through the gully known as the Piper's Throat. It was a place where a man could vanish and not be found until the spring thaw. Hamish Macbeth trudged along the path, his tall frame silhouetted against the silver-grey sky. He moved with a heavy rhythmic plod, his shoulders hunched and his head down. Under his arm he clutched the bulky manila envelope with a proprietary air. Lugs followed a few paces behind, his hackles raised and his nose twitching at the scent of damp earth and something sharper, the metallic tang of anticipation. "It's a long walk for a short drink of water, Lugs," Hamish muttered, his voice swallowed by the wind. He reached a flat plateau where the path widened near an ancient lightning-scarred rowan tree. Below them, the loch was a sheet of hammered lead. Hamish stopped, leaning against the tree as if to catch his breath. He fumbled in his pocket for a pipe, his movements slow and clumsy, the very picture of a tired village bobby. "I wouldn't bother lighting that, Constable. It's bad for the lungs, and you won't be needing them for much longer." The voice was cool, precise, and entirely devoid of the panic stuttering Hamish had heard in the hotel lounge. Arthur, the lawyer, stepped out from the shadow of a large boulder. He wasn't wearing his charcoal suit. He was clad in a dark, waterproof hacking jacket, and in his hand he held a heavy, professional-looking crowbar. Hamish didn't jump. He didn't even drop his pipe. Oh, he just turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and vacant. "Mr. Arthur? Is that you? It's a bit late for a stroll on the crags, so it is. The paths are quite shallow in the dark." "Drop the envelope, Macbeth," Arthur said, taking a step forward. Behind him the shadows shifted again. Lord Ponsonby emerged, looking green around the gills, but clutching a heavy decorative poker he must have liberated from the hotel fireplace. "I told you he was a fool," Ponsonby hissed, his voice trembling. "Just take the book and let's get out of this wretched wind." Now, Lord Ponsonby," Hamish said, his Highland drawl becoming even thicker. "Is this any way to treat the law? I was just taking these papers to the specialist. It's very important work, so it is." "There is no specialist," Arthur sneered, his eyes locking onto the envelope. "You're a bored little man playing detective. You found Penelope's notebook, and you thought you could use it, but you don't understand the stakes. That book represents millions of pounds and centuries of reputation. You're just a Highland peasant in a cheap uniform." "Aye," Hamish sighed, "I'm a peasant, sure enough. But tell me one thing, Mr. Arthur, before you do whatever it is you're planning to do with that iron bar. How did you get the arsenic onto her fingers?" It was a clever bit of work, so it was. Arthur paused, a flicker of pride crossing his sharp features. Penelope was a creature of habit. She always demanded a bowl of warm water to wash the Highland filth off before she touched her precious gold leaf. I simply offered to bring it. A little concentrated arsenic powder in the towel. She rubbed it right into her skin while she was drying her hands. By the time she was applying the gold to those ridiculous scones, she was effectively seasoning her own last meal. She licked her thumb to separate the leaves, you see. Such a vulgar habit. "And you watched her die," Hamish said softly. "I watched a parasite be removed," Arthur snapped. "Now, the envelope. Give it here." Hamish held it out, his hand shaking slightly. Arthur lunged for it, his fingers clawing at the paper. As he ripped it open, a flurry of old electricity bills, a dry-cleaning receipt for a kilt, and several pages of a Gaelic to English dictionary spilled out into the wind, swirling around his feet like confetti. "What is this?" Arthur roared, staring at a scrap of paper that listed the price of sheep dip and a reminder to buy dog biscuits. "That," Hamish said, his voice suddenly losing its slow, rustic quality and becoming as hard as the rock beneath them, "is my shopping list. The notebook is currently locked in a safe at the Tumble Castle Hotel, under the watchful eye of Priscilla Halberton Smythe." Arthur let out a guttural scream of rage and swung the crowbar, but Hamish wasn't there. With the fluid, deceptive speed of a man who spent his life stalking deer through the heather, he stepped inside the lawyer's reach. He caught Arthur's wrist in a grip of iron and twisted. The crowbar clattered to the stones. Ponsonby made a half-hearted lunge with the poker, but Luggs let out a roar that sounded more like a lion than a dog, snapping at the lord's expensive trousers. Ponsonby tripped over a tussock of grass and sat down hard, the poker clattering away into the darkness. "It's a messy business, murder," Hamish said, pinning Arthur against the rowan tree. The lawyer struggled, but Hamish was a man who hauled salmon nets and wrestled rams. The city man was no match for him. "And it's a long walk back to the village in handcuffs. I hope your shoes are sturdy, Mr. Arthur. You can't prove anything," Arthur gasped. "It's my word against a local bobby's." "Och, I wouldn't be so sure," Hamish said, nodding toward the gorse bushes. From the shadows, a small, shivering figure stepped out. It was Mary, clutching a small tape recorder she had borrowed from the hotel's business centre. "I heard it all," she whispered, her voice steady despite the wind. Every word about the towel and the powder. Hamish looked down at the ruined lawyer. "In the Highlands, Mr. Arthur, we might be slow, and we might be poor, but we know how to listen. And we especially know when someone is talking too much." Chapter 10. The magnanimity of P.C. Macbeth the sun rose over Lochdubh with a rare, watery brilliance, casting long golden fingers across the still waters of the loch. Inside the police station, the air was thick with the smell of burnt toast and the aggressive, self-important pacing of D.C. the Blair. Arthur, the lawyer, sat in the small, damp cell at the back, his expensive hacking jacket ruined and his dignity non-existent. Lord Ponsonby had been released on a stinging bail, currently sequestered in the hotel with a bottle of brandy and a very long bill from his own legal counsel. "A tape recording, Macbeth," Blair bellowed, slamming his fist onto the wooden desk. "A common handheld tape recorder. Do you have any idea how much paperwork this is going to generate? The chain of evidence is a shambles. I should have you disciplined for engaging in a rogue sting operation without authorization from Strathbane." Hamish, who was sitting by the stove carefully polishing a brass button on his spare tunic, looked up with an expression of profound, wide-eyed apology. "Oh, I'm that sorry, sir. Truly I am. I was just out for a walk with Luggs, and there they were, shouting about towels and arsenic. I thought to myself, Hamish, you're too slow to remember all this. You'd better press the little red button Mary showed you." Blair stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. He looked at the tape recorder sitting on the desk, the device that held a full, arrogant confession of a calculated murder. Then he looked at Hamish, who appeared to be struggling to remember which end of the polishing cloth was which. "The superintendent is going to want a full briefing," Blair muttered, his voice dropping an octave as the gears of ambition began to grind. A high-profile arrest, a London lawyer, a complex poisoning method involving gold leaf and towels. It's the sort of case that makes a career. Hamish sighed, a long, mournful sound. "It's a terrible burden, so it is. All those reporters coming up from the city, the television cameras, the promotion boards in Glasgow. I suppose I'll have to move to a big office with a telephone that never stops ringing. I'll miss the fishing, I will." Blair stiffened. The thought of Hamish Macbeth, this lanky, poaching, red-headed peasant getting a commendation and being transferred to a station where he might actually be seen by the top brass was more than Blair could stomach. More importantly, Blair wanted that promotion for himself. "Now wait a minute, Macbeth," Blair said, his voice suddenly oily and conspiratorial. "You're a village man. You belong here with your mongrel and your peat bogs. Move to the city would kill a man of your limited intellectual horizons." Hamish looked down at his boots, looking crestfallen. "Do you think so, sir? But the arrest, the super will be asking who led the investigation." Blair puffed out his chest, adjusting his tie. "Well, technically I did authorize the surveillance of the suspects, and it was my toxicological lead on the arsenic that put the pressure on them. Your little walk was merely the closing of the net I had already cast." Hamish blinked, a glimmer of hope touching his face. "So, you could be saying it was your operation, sir? That you sent me out there as a sort of human bait? To draw them out while you coordinated from the command centre?" Blair beamed. Exactly. Operation Golden Scone. It has a certain ring to it, don't you think? I'll write the report. I'll mention your assistance in the footnotes, of course. A loyal if somewhat bumbling local officer following orders. Oh, thank you, sir. Hamish cried, standing up and shaking Blair's hand with a vigour that nearly dislocated the inspector's shoulder. That would be a great weight off my mind. I would hate to be the one having to talk to the newspapers. My Gaelic gets in the way when I'm nervous, and I start sounding like a mountain goat. Yes, yes, Blair said, already reaching for his briefcase. I'll handle the press. I'll head back to Strathbane now and get the statement drafted. Anderson, McLean, get the prisoner in the car. We have a press conference to prepare for. As the police cars roared out of the village, sirens blaring for no reason other than Blair's ego, Hamish stood in the doorway of the station. Luggs trotted up and sat beside him, watching the dust settle. Well, Luggs, Hamish whispered, a slow, sharp intelligence returning to his amber eyes. He's gone, and he's taken the paperwork with him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried piece of salmon, tossing it to the dog. From the direction of the hotel, he saw the Colonel's Rover approaching. Priscilla was at the wheel. Hamish, she called out, pulling up to the curb. I hear Blair is taking the credit. The village is saying he's a genius. Hamish leaned against the doorframe, his lazy slouch firmly back in place. Aye, he's a giant among men, is DCI Blair. He's going to be very busy in Strathbane for a long time, which means it'll be very quiet here. Priscilla laughed, a bright, clear sound in the morning air. The Colonel is opening that Malmsey, Hamish, and Mary is staying with us for a few days before she goes home to London. She wants to thank the man who saved her from a very dark place. I'll be up in a bit, Priscilla, Hamish said, tipping his cap. I just have to finish my stew. A man can't be drinking fine wine on an empty stomach. As the Rover drove away, Hamish turned back into the quiet, dim interior of the station. The black notebook was gone handed over to the proper authorities in a way that ensured the blackmailers were neutralised without destroying the lives of their victims. The Sassenach storm had passed, leaving Lochdubh exactly as it had been for centuries. He sat by the stove, the fire crackling softly. He had his dog, his coffee, and his peace. And in the Highlands, Hamish Macbeth knew that was more valuable than all the gold leaf in London. Chapter 11. The peace of the poacher, the roar of DC I's convoy had long since faded, replaced by the rhythmic, comforting drip of snowmelt from the station's eaves. Lochdubh was exhaling. The flashy gold Range Rover still sat abandoned in the driveway of the Brae, a metallic monument to a woman who had tried to buy the Highlands and found herself owned by 6 feet of its peat instead. Hamish Macbeth stood by his kitchen table, the light of a single lamp casting a long, spindly shadow against the whitewashed wall. He wasn't looking at police reports or evidence bags. He was looking at a large ceramic pot of stew that had been simmering on the peat stove for the better part of 2 days. It's the secret, Luggs, Hamish murmured, stirring the thick brown gravy. Patience. Whether it's a Highland mutton or a London lawyer, you just have to wait for them to soften up. Luggs gave a short, sharp bark of agreement, his tail thumping against the linoleum. There was a soft knock at the door, not the frantic pounding of a panicked villager or the authoritative rap of a Strathbane official, but the hesitant, light touch of someone seeking sanctuary. Hamish opened it to find Mary. She was dressed in a thick wool coat lent to her by Mrs. Gillespie, and her face, though still pale, lacked the haunted, trapped look shed carried in the bus shelter. I'm leaving in the morning, Constable, she said, stepping into the warmth of the kitchen. The Colonel is driving me to Inverness himself. He says the train tracks are clear now. That's grand, Mary. Truly grand, Hamish said, pulling out a chair for her. And your brother? I've had a wee word with a friend of mine in the Metropolitan Police, a man who owes me, a favour for a certain matter involving a stolen Highland pony and a lord's daughter. He says the incident with the car was settled as a civil matter months ago. Penelope was lying to you. Ah, she'd suppressed the paperwork just to keep you under her thumb. Mary sank into the chair, a long, shuddering breath escaping her. I suspected, but I was too afraid to look. Thank you, Hamish, for everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet-lined box. It was the kit Penelope had used for the gold leaf scones. The forensics men missed this in the sideboard. I found it when I went back to get my things. I thought you might want to see it. Hamish opened the box. Inside were the silver tweezers and a few remaining flakes of gold, but tucked into a hidden slit in the velvet was a small folded piece of paper. Hamish opened it and read the elegant spiked handwriting. To my successor, the village is a graveyard of secrets. Dig deep enough, and you'll find they all lead back to the water. Hamish felt a cold draft whistle through the kitchen. Penelope Sterling hadn't just been a blackmailer, she had been a student of human nature. She had known that her end was coming, and she relished the chaos she left behind. She was a wicked woman, Mary whispered, watching his face. She was a lonely one, Hamish corrected gently, folding the paper and dropping it into the heart of the peat fire. He watched the flames turn blue as the ink and paper vanished, and loneliness in a place like this can turn a heart to flint. You go on home, Mary. Forget Lochdubh. Forget the shones and the gold. Go find a place where the sun shines more than the rain falls. After Mary had gone, Hamish sat in the silence of the station. He thought about the successes Penelope had mentioned. He thought about Blair, currently preening for the cameras in Strathbane, claiming credit for a case he hadn't understood. He thought about Lord Ponsonby, who would likely sell his Sussex estate to pay for the scandal, and Arthur, who would trade his silk ties for a grey prison jumpsuit. The phone rang. Hamish stared at it for a long time. It was likely the superintendent, wanting to verify a detail, or perhaps a journalist who had managed to find the local number. He didn't answer it. Instead, he reached out and lifted the receiver off the hook, setting it gently on the desk. "I'm off duty, Lugs," he said, reaching for his heavy tweed jacket. He walked out into the crisp, cold night. The stars were out now, bright and hard as diamonds over the peaks of the Swilvan. He made his way down to the waterfront, past the closed shop of the curry house and the darkened windows of the hotel. He reached the old stone pier where the fishing boats bobbed in the dark. A shadow detached itself from the gloom of a fish crate. It was Angus MC. "The fat one's gone, then," Angus grunted, offering Hamish a flask that smelled of something illegal and very potent. "Aye, Angus. He's gone to be a hero in the city." Angus nodded, taking a long pull from the flask. "I heard you found the gold. Terrible waste. Gold should be on a ring, not a scone." "It's a strange world, Angus," Hamish said, looking out at the black water. "People wanting to be what they are not, and people wanting what they should not have. And what do you want, Macbeth?" Hamish leaned against the cold stone of the pier, the salt air filling his lungs. He thought about the promotion he dodged, the paperwork he avoided, and the quiet life he fought so hard to keep. "I want to go home," Hamish said softly. "I want to eat my stew, and I want to sleep without dreaming of London lawyers." He walked back up the hill, his lanky stride slow and easy. He was just a village bobby, a man who looked like he couldn't catch a cold, let alone a killer. And as long as the world believed that Hamish Macbeth was the happiest man in the Highlands, he reached his door, whistled for Lugs, and stepped inside. The fire was still warm, the stew was ready, and for the first time in a week, the air in Lochdubh was clear. The mystery of the Murderous High Tea was over, but in the Highlands there was always another shadow on the mountain, and another secret beneath the loch. And Hamish Macbeth would be there, sitting quietly, drinking his tea, and waiting for the silence to speak. Chapter 12. The bitter aftertaste the Monday morning, after the high tea horror, as the Strathbane Sentinel had inevitably dubbed it, found Lochdubh returning to its natural, somnolent state. The yellow police tape that had fluttered so aggressively around the Brae was now nothing more than a tangled mess of plastic caught in a gorse bush. Inside the police station, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the low hum of a radio playing a mournful Gaelic lament. Hamish Macbeth was engaged in the most strenuous activity he had performed all week, leaning against the doorframe and watching a spider attempt to bridge the gap between the siren and the guttering. "It's a lesson in persistence, Lugs," Hamish murmured. "Unlike DCI Blair, the spider doesn't stop to call a press conference every time he hits a silk strand." Lugs, who was occupied with a particularly stubborn itch behind his left ear, gave a non-committal grunt. The piece was interrupted by the crunch of tyres on gravel. A silver Mercedes leak, understated and terrifyingly expensive, pulled up to the station. Stepped Arthur's legal partner, a man named Mr. Forbes Grey, who looked as though he'd been ironed into his three-piece suit. He carried a leather briefcase with the air of a man delivering a death warrant. "Constable Macbeth?" Forbes Grey asked, stepping into the small office and wrinkling his nose at the faint lingering scent of Hamish's morning kipper. "That would be me, sir," Hamish said, his voice dropping into its most vacant rural drawl. "Can I be helping you?" "The DCI is back in Strathbane, if it's the high-level legalities you're after." "I am here regarding the estate of the late Penelope Sterling," Forbes Grey said, snapping open his briefcase. "As her primary executors, we are overseeing the liquidation of her local assets. It seems Missy Sterling had a rather extensive collection of local memorabilia stored at the Brae, items that were not logged in the official police inventory." Hamish tilted his head, looking like a confused collie. "Memorabilia? You mean the lace doilies and the fancy tea strainers?" "I mean records, Constable. ledgers. Correspondence with certain members of the local community regarding land rights and ancient debts. My client, Lord Ponsonby, has expressed concern that these private documents might fall into the wrong hands. Hamish scratched his red hair. Ah, the papers. DCI Blair took a great many boxes back with him. He said they were crucial evidence for his promotion. I mean for the prosecution. Forbes Grey leaned in, his eyes sharp. And the black notebook, the one the girl Mary mentioned in her statement, the one that supposedly contains the keys to the kingdom. Hamish reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small charred scrap of leather. It was all that remained of the notebook's cover, which he had rescued from the grate of his stove that morning. "Is this it, then?" Hamish asked innocently. "I found it in the fireplace up at the house. Seems the lady was burning her bridges before she crossed them. A terrible shame, so it is. All that history gone up in smoke." Forbes Grey stared at the blackened scrap. A visible wave of relief washed over his face, followed quickly by a look of profound contempt for the clumsy policeman who had allowed such a thing to happen. "Incompetence," the lawyer muttered, snapping his briefcase shut. "Utter Highland incompetence. I shall be noting this in my report to the Chief Constable. Good day to you, Macbeth." As the Mercedes sped away, Hamish's slouch vanished. He reached into his tunic pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, not the blackmail notes, but a simple list of names Penelope had been planning to help into early retirement. He walked over to the stove and dropped it in. He had spent the weekend mooching tea and scones across the village, quietly returning several items he had found at the Brae to their rightful owners. A set of silver spoons to the minister, a long-lost deed to Mrs. Gillespie, and a rather embarrassing series of letters to the local doctor. The village was clean. The secrets were buried, and DCI Blair was currently buried under 500 pages of useless financial records that would lead him in circles for years. The telephone rang. Hamish looked at it, then at the bright, clear sky outside. He didn't pick it up. He knew it would be headquarters, asking why he hadn't submitted his mileage report for the month. "Come on, love," Hamish said, grabbing his fishing rod from behind the door. "Anne will be jumping at the falls, and there's no one left in the village with a gold car to complain about the smell." As he walked down the path toward the loch, Hamish felt the weight of the week lift from his shoulders. He had saved a girl, caught a killer, and managed to look like a complete idiot in the process, the perfect trifecta for a man who wanted nothing more than to stay exactly where he was. In the distance, the mountains stood silent and eternal, indifferent to the pecky greeds of men. Lochdubh was quiet again. The Sassenach had come and gone, and the Highlands had, as always, swallowed the disturbance without a ripple. Hamish cast his line into the dark, swirling water, the silver fly dancing on the surface. He was a man with no ambition, no money, and a dog with ugly ears. He was, as he often reminded himself, the luckiest man in Scotland.